Supreme Commander Zithran stood on the bridge of the Imperial flagship, Eternal Dominion, and looked down at the blue planet below him with nothing but contempt in his 4 eyes. For this was Earth, home to a species called humans, and they were about to learn what every other species in the galaxy had learned before them. The Valkyrie Empire had ruled the stars for 12,000 years, and in all that time, they had conquered over 2,000 worlds and brought countless species to their knees, because that was simply how the universe worked, and the strong would always dominate the weak. Zithran's scales shifted from dark purple to a satisfied crimson as he watched his fleet of 340 warships take position around this insignificant world. And he could not help but feel a sense of boredom, because this conquest would be no different from all the others that came before it. Supreme Commander, his tactical officer Vethanar, called out from his station. "All ships are in position and weapons are fully charged, so we await your orders." Zithran did not respond immediately, instead choosing to study the planet on the massive holographic display that floated before him. And he observed the tiny lights of human cities scattered across the continents like insects crawling on a rock. The humans had only achieved interstellar travel within the last century, which made them practically infants in the eyes of the galaxy. And their technology was laughably primitive compared to the might of the Valkyrie. Intelligence reports had told Zithran everything he needed to know about this species. And the information was not impressive at all, because humans were a fractured people who could not even agree among themselves, constantly fighting wars over resources and borders and ideas. They had no unified military command, no planetary defense grid worth mentioning, and their weapons were barely capable of damaging a Valkyrie shuttle, let alone a warship. These creatures call themselves a spacefaring civilization, Zithran said with a rumbling laugh that echoed through the bridge. But they are nothing more than children playing with toys they do not understand. His officers joined in the laughter because they had all seen this scenario play out dozens of times before, and they knew exactly how it would end. The Valkyrie had a protocol for conquering new worlds, and it had never failed them in all their thousands of years of expansion, because it was simple and brutal and effective. First, they would deliver a demonstration strike on a major population center to show the target species the futility of resistance. And then they would wait for the inevitable surrender that always followed within hours. No species had ever resisted after witnessing the power of the Valkyrie, and Zithran was certain that these humans would be no different from all the others. "Select the target," Zithran commanded, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "Choose one of their larger cities, something with at least 10 million inhabitants." Vethanar worked at his console for a moment before responding. "Supreme Commander, I have identified a suitable target on the southern continent. A city called Snow Paulo, with a population of approximately 12 million. Zithran nodded his massive head in approval, because 12 million was a good number. Large enough to make an impact, but small enough to leave plenty of the population alive for labor. "Prepare the primary plasma lance," Zithran ordered, "and make sure to broadcast the strike across all frequencies so that every human on this planet can watch and understand what happens to those who stand in the path of the Valkyrie Empire." The bridge crew moved with practiced efficiency, their hands dancing across holographic interfaces as they brought the flagship's main weapon online. Deep within the belly of the Eternal Dominion, massive power cores hummed to life, channeling energy into the plasma lance that ran through the center of the ship like a spine of pure destruction. "Weapon charged and ready, Supreme Commander," Vethanar reported, his voice betraying a hint of excitement, because even after all these years, there was something thrilling about watching the plasma lance fire. Zithran allowed himself a moment to savor the anticipation, because this was the moment he lived for. The moment when a new species would learn their place in the universe. "Fire," he said simply, and with that single word, he sealed the fate of 12 million human beings. The plasma lance discharged with a blinding flash of light that could be seen from every ship in the fleet, sending a concentrated beam of superheated plasma screaming down through Earth's atmosphere. The beam struck Snow Paulo with the force of a small sun, and in an instant, the entire city was gone, vaporized in a flash of light and heat that left nothing but a crater of molten glass where 12 million people had lived and worked and loved just seconds before. Zithran watched the destruction on the display screen with cold satisfaction, because this was how it was done. This was how the Valkyrie brought order to a chaotic universe. "Open all communication channels," he commanded, "and prepare to receive their surrender, because it should not take long now." The bridge crew waited with knowing smiles on their faces, because they had all seen this moment many times before, and they knew that within minutes, the humans would be begging for mercy. But the minutes passed, and no transmission came, and the smiles on the faces of the Valkyrie officers began to fade into confusion. "Vethaner," Zithran said with growing irritation, "why are we not receiving any communications from the planet?" The tactical officer worked frantically at his console, his scales shifting to a worried blue color. "Supreme Commander, something strange is happening, because all of their global communication networks have gone completely dark." "Dark?" Zithran repeated, not understanding what his officer meant. "Explain yourself." "Their satellites, their transmission towers, their entire communications infrastructure has gone offline simultaneously," Vethaner reported, his voice trembling slightly. "It is as if they have deliberately shut everything down." This was not how conquered species behaved, and Zithran felt the first tiny seed of Ani's plan itself in his stomach, because in all his years of conquest, he had never seen a reaction like this. When species were struck by the Valkyrie, they panicked and screamed and begged, but they did not go silent, because silence required coordination and control, and those were not things that terrified primitives possessed. "Supreme Commander," another officer called out from across the bridge, his voice high with alarm, "I am detecting energy signatures rising from the planet's surface." "What kind of energy signatures?" Zithran demanded, striding toward the officer's station with sudden urgency. "Unknown configuration," the officer replied, "but there are thousands of them, and they are coming from beneath the surface, from hidden locations across every continent." Zithran stared at the display screen as it filled with red dots representing the energy signatures, and he watched in growing horror as silos opened beneath mountains and deserts and oceans, revealing weapons platforms that human intelligence reports had never mentioned. "This is impossible," Vethaner whispered, his scales now completely white with fear. "They told us the humans had no significant military capability." Zithran gripped the railing of the command platform so hard that the metal bent beneath his claws, because he was beginning to realize that they had made a terrible mistake. The humans had not been primitive at all. They had been hiding, pretending to be weak while secretly building something that no one in the galaxy had ever anticipated. And now, 12,000 years of Valkyrie supremacy was about to face a challenge that Supreme Commander Zithran could never have imagined in his darkest nightmares. The last thing he saw before the first missiles entered hyperspace was the cold blue glow of weapons that should not exist, rising from a planet that should have been helpless. And in that moment, Zithran finally understood the truth that would cost him everything he had ever known. The Valkyrie had not come to conquer Earth. They had come to die. 2,200 meters beneath Cheyenne Mountain, in a facility that did not exist on any map or any record, General Adrienne Cole stood before a wall of screens and watched her world burn. The footage from Snow Paulo played on a loop, showing the moment when the alien plasma lance struck the city, and 12 million people simply ceased to exist in a flash of light that lasted less than a second. Cole's hands were clenched into fists at her sides. and her knuckles had turned white from the pressure. But her face remained as still as carved stone, because she could not afford to show weakness, not now. Not when the fate of all humanity rested on her shoulders. The command center around her was filled with the best military minds on Earth. Men and women from every nation who had spent their entire careers preparing for this exact moment, hoping it would never come but knowing deep down that it would. General Carl James Chun called out from his station, his voice steady despite the horror playing out on the screens. All Prometheus platforms are reporting green across the board, and we are ready to execute on your command. Cole did not respond immediately, instead taking one last look at the frozen image of Snow Paulo before it was destroyed, because she wanted to remember what they were fighting for. 60 years ago, when humanity had made first contact with the galactic community, they had been filled with hope and wonder and dreams of peaceful cooperation among the stars. But those dreams had died quickly, because the universe they discovered was not a place of friendship and exploration, but a savage wilderness where the strong devoured the weak without mercy or hesitation. The Valkyrie Empire had ruled that wilderness for 12,000 years, and every species that had openly displayed strength had been conquered, enslaved, or exterminated. So the leaders of Earth had made a decision that would remain secret from the general population for 6 decades. And they had chosen to lie. They presented humanity as fractured and primitive, barely capable of reaching their own moon, and they joined no alliances and made no friends. Because friends attracted attention, and attention attracted predators. But while the rest of the galaxy saw a helpless species stumbling through space, the truth was something far different. Every nation on Earth had united in secret, putting aside centuries of conflict and mistrust to work toward a single goal, and that goal was survival at any cost. They called it Project Prometheus, named after the Greek titan who stole fire from the gods and gave it to humanity. And it was the most ambitious military undertaking in human history. Using reverse-engineered alien technology obtained through espionage and black market deals, human scientists had achieved breakthroughs that should have taken centuries, and they had done it all in complete secrecy. 12,000 weapons platforms had been constructed and hidden beneath the surface of every continent, buried so deep that no orbital scan could detect them. Each platform contained missiles unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Weapons that could travel through hyperspace without the need for massive ships or complex navigation systems. The warheads themselves were even more terrifying, because they carried quantum disruption payloads that could destabilize matter at the atomic level, tearing apart anything they struck regardless of shields or armor. For 60 years, humanity had waited in silence, praying that they would never need to use the weapons they had built, hoping that the Valkyrie and other empires would simply ignore their little blue world. But today, that hope had died with 12 million people in Snow Paulo. "Show me the fleet positions," Cole commanded, and instantly the main screen changed to display the alien armada orbiting Earth. 340 warships surrounded the planet like a noose, each one bristling with weapons capable of reducing cities to ash. And at their center sat the massive flagship that had delivered the killing blow. "Colonel Chun," Cole said, her voice cutting through the tense silence of the command center, "execute Protocol 7 and bring all communication systems offline, because I want complete radio silence across the entire planet." Chun nodded and began issuing orders, and within seconds, every satellite, every transmission tower, every communication device on Earth went dark. The Valkyrie would be expecting panic and surrender, but instead, they would receive only silence, and that silence would be the last thing they ever heard. "General," a young lieutenant called out from across the room, her voice trembling slightly. "What about evacuation protocols? Should we warn the civilian population?" Cole turned to look at the young woman, and for just a moment, Her stone mask cracked to reveal the grief and rage burning beneath the surface. "There is no evacuation possible," Cole replied, "because we either win in the next few minutes or humanity dies today, and those are the only two options available to us." The lieutenant swallowed hard but nodded in understanding, because she knew the general was right. Cole turned back to the main display and watched as the Prometheus platforms completed their activation sequences. 12,000 silos opening simultaneously across the globe like wounds in the earth itself. "Targeting solutions are locked," Chen reported. "We have confirmed coordinates for every Velkari military installation within 400 light-years, including their home fleet, their core worlds, their outer colonies, and their imperial capital." For decades, human intelligence operatives had posed as merchants and refugees, traveling throughout Velkari space and mapping every military target they could find. They had died by the hundreds, sacrificing their lives to gather information that would only matter if this terrible day ever came. And now, their sacrifice would finally mean something. "The entire empire," Cole said quietly, almost to herself. "We are about to destroy an entire empire that has existed for 12,000 years. She thought about what that meant, about the millions of Velkari who would die in the next few minutes, and she felt the weight of that decision pressing down on her soul like a mountain. But then she thought about Snowpolo, about the 12 million humans who had been murdered without warning or reason, and the weight became something else entirely. It became fuel. "General," Chun said, "waiting for the order that would change the galaxy forever. All platforms are standing by." Cole took a deep breath and closed her eyes for just a moment, saying a silent prayer for the dead and asking forgiveness for what she was about to do. When she opened her eyes again, they were hard and cold and filled with a determination that could not be shaken. "All platforms," she said, her voice echoing through the command center with the authority of humanity itself. "Weapons free." She paused for just a heartbeat, letting the moment stretch out into eternity. "Burn them all!" The response was instantaneous, as 12,000 platforms launched their payloads simultaneously, filling the sky with streaks of light that disappeared into hyperspace almost as quickly as they appeared. The missiles did not need to travel through normal space, because human engineers had discovered something that no other species in the galaxy had achieved. And they had learned how to create micro-hyperspace tunnels for unmanned projectiles. The weapons would not fly toward their targets over days or weeks or months. They would simply appear inside them, bypassing every defense the Velkari had ever built. Cole watched the launch indicators turn green across her display. Thousands upon thousands of missiles vanishing into the void, each one carrying enough destructive power to destroy a warship or level a military base. "First wave away," Chun reported. "Impact on local fleet in approximately 45 seconds. 45 seconds, Cole thought. That was all the time the Velkari had left to live. She looked up at the image of the alien flagship still hovering in orbit, that massive monument to 12,000 years of conquest and cruelty, and she felt no pity for those aboard. They had come to Earth expecting to find helpless prey, but they had found something else entirely. They had found humanity, and humanity did not kneel. "Colonel," Cole said as the countdown timer reached its final seconds, "make sure our broadcast is ready, because when this is over, I want the entire galaxy to know what happened here today." Chun nodded, his fingers dancing across his console to prepare the transmission that would be sent to every civilization in known space. The timer reached 0, and somewhere in orbit, 340 Velkari warships ceased to exist. The 14-minute war had begun, and by the time it ended, the galaxy would never be the same again. Supreme Commander Zithran had exactly 3 seconds to feel fear before he died. The missiles did not approach the Eternal Dominion from outside, where sensors could detect them and shields could deflect them, because they did not need to approach at all. Instead, they simply materialized inside the ship, bypassing 12,000 years of defensive technology as if it did not exist. Zithran saw a flash of light appear in the center of his bridge, and then the quantum disruption warhead detonated, and every atom in his body was torn apart at the most fundamental level. He felt no pain, because there was no time for pain. And one moment, he was the supreme commander of the greatest military force in the galaxy. And the next moment, he was nothing but scattered particles drifting through the void. The Eternal Dominion died with him, the massive flagship splitting apart in a silent explosion that consumed everything and everyone aboard in less than a heartbeat. Across Earth orbit, 339 other Valkyrie warships suffered the same fate in almost perfect synchronization. Captains and crews who had laughed at human primitives just minutes before never even had time to scream, because the missiles appeared inside their ships and detonated before their minds could process what was happening. The entire invasion fleet, which had taken months to assemble and represented a significant portion of Valkyrie military might, was reduced to expanding clouds of debris in the span of 3 minutes. On Earth, deep beneath Cheyenne Mountain, General Cole watched the orbital display clear of enemy contacts and allowed herself exactly 1 second of satisfaction before focusing on the next targets. "First wave complete," Colonel Chun reported, his voice professional despite the magnitude of what they had just accomplished. "Local fleet is eliminated, and second wave will reach the Valkyrie core worlds in approximately 90 seconds. The missiles were already streaking through hyperspace toward targets that were hundreds of light years away, traveling distances that should have taken months in mere moments. Human scientists had theorized that hyperspace could be used for weapons delivery, but every other species in the galaxy had dismissed the idea as impossible, because the energy requirements were supposedly too enormous. What they had not understood was that human engineers did not accept the word impossible. They had found ways to reduce the energy requirements through innovations that no alien scientist had ever considered, because humans had a talent for solving problems that others thought could not be solved. On Valkyrie Prime, the Imperial capital world, citizens went about their daily lives without any idea that their empire had just lost its entire Earth invasion fleet. High Admiral Kratzan sat in his command center on Orbital Station 7, reviewing reports from various fleet deployments across the Empire. And he was looking forward to receiving news of another successful conquest. He never received that news. The second wave of missiles emerged from hyperspace at minute 4, appearing simultaneously at dozens of locations throughout the Valkyrie core systems. Orbital Station 7 was the first to die, along with the 14 other defense stations that protected the homeworld, each one destroyed by warheads that materialized inside their reactor cores. Kratzan did not even have time to look up from his reports before his station ceased to exist. Shipyards that had taken centuries to build were reduced to twisted wreckage in seconds, and the partially constructed warships inside them were torn apart before they could ever taste the void. Military academies where the next generation of Valkyrie officers trained were struck without warning, and thousands of young soldiers who had dreamed of glory and conquest died without ever firing a weapon. Communication relays were targeted with surgical precision, cutting off the core worlds from the rest of the Empire and ensuring that no warning could be sent to the outer colonies. The Valkyrie had spent 12,000 years building their military infrastructure, layer upon layer of defensive capabilities that they believed made them invincible. All of it was destroyed in less than 4 minutes. At minute 8, the third wave reached the outer colonies and fleet staging grounds, striking at targets that were scattered across hundreds of light years. Fleet Admiral Yethro was commanding a task force of 50 warships near the Carthan Nebula when the missiles appeared, and she had exactly enough time to see the flash of light before her flagship was torn apart. Every ship in her task force suffered the same fate, their shields and armor proving completely useless against weapons that did not bother to attack from outside. Across the Empire, similar scenes played out in dozens of locations simultaneously. Staging grounds where invasion fleets were being assembled for future conquests became graveyards of twisted metal. Supply depots that had supported Valkyrie expansion for millennia were reduced to clouds of debris. Listening posts and sensor arrays that had given the Empire eyes and ears across the galaxy went dark forever. Back on Earth, General Cole watched the cascade of destruction unfold on her displays, and she felt the weight of history pressing down on her shoulders. Third wave impacts confirmed, Chun reported. Outer military installations are neutralized, and final wave is approaching Valkyrie Prime. The final wave had been designed for a very specific purpose, and it was not aimed at civilians or cities or infrastructure. Human intelligence had spent decades mapping the locations of every important government and military building on the Valkyrie homeworld. They knew where the Imperial Palace stood, that massive structure that had housed the ruling dynasty for 8,000 years. They knew where the Senate of Conquest met, that chamber where the leaders of the Empire made their decisions to subjugate and enslave. They knew where the Temple of Supreme Command was located, the sacred building where military strategy was planned and approved by the High Council. At minute 12, the final wave emerged from hyperspace directly above Valkyrie Prime, and the missiles descended on their targets like the wrath of an angry god. The Imperial Palace was the first to fall, its ancient walls providing no protection against weapons that materialized inside its chambers. Emperor Zathkor, the Eternal, ruler of 2,000 worlds and master of 12,000 years of conquest, died in his throne room without ever knowing what had killed him. His entire dynasty, hundreds of princes and princesses and royal advisors, perished with him in a flash of light that erased 8,000 years of bloodline. The Senate of Conquest was struck next, and 300 senators who had voted for countless wars of aggression were vaporized in their seats. The Temple of Supreme Command followed, along with every admiral and general and strategist who had guided the Empire's military expansion for generations. At minute 14, the last missile detonated, and an empire that had terrorized the galaxy for 12,000 years simply ceased to exist as a functioning entity. The Valkyrie species still survived, billions of civilians who had played no part in their empire's crimes, and humanity had deliberately spared them. But their military was gone, their leadership was gone, their ability to wage war was gone, and they would never threaten another world again. General Cole stared at her displays as the final impact confirmations came in, and she realized that she had just done something that no other being in galactic history had ever accomplished. She had destroyed an empire in 14 minutes. "Colonel," she said quietly, her voice carrying a weight that words alone could not express, "prepare my broadcast, because the galaxy needs to understand what happened here today." Chun nodded and began the final preparations, while around them, the command center staff sat in stunned silence. They had trained for this moment for decades, but none of them had truly believed it would ever come. And now that it had, they were struggling to process the magnitude of what they had done. 12 million humans had died in Snow Hollow, and that loss would never be forgotten or forgiven. But humanity had answered that atrocity with a demonstration of power that would echo through galactic history forever. The Valkyrie had believed that striking first would guarantee their victory. They had been wrong. And now the entire galaxy would learn the truth about humanity, the truth that had been hidden for 60 years. Earth was not a world to be conquered. It was a world that conquered back. Ambassador Kethra of the Morvani Collective had lived for 312 years, and in all that time, she had witnessed horrors that would break lesser beings. She had watched her own homeworld burn when the Valkyrie conquered her people 2 centuries ago. She had seen her brothers and sisters sold into slavery and worked to death in alien mines. She had stood helpless as species after species fell before the unstoppable march of imperial expansion. But nothing in her long and painful life had prepared her for what she was witnessing now. The Galactic Observation Council had gathered in emergency session aboard Axis Prime, the neutral space station that floated in the void between empires. And the chamber was filled with representatives from 47 spacefaring civilizations. Every one of them sat in absolute silence, their eyes fixed on the holographic displays that showed data feeds from across Valkyrie space. The numbers were impossible, and yet the data confirmed them again and again. 340 warships destroyed in Earth orbit, 14 orbital defense stations eliminated around the homeworld, 73 shipyards reduced to debris, 92 military academies wiped from existence, 216 fleet staging grounds neutralized. The entire leadership cast of the Valkyrie Empire erased in a single coordinated strike. And all of it had happened in 14 minutes. This cannot be accurate, Ambassador Vorath of the Krellian Federation said, his voice trembling with disbelief. The data must be corrupted, because what it describes is simply impossible. The data is accurate, the Council's chief analyst responded. A small being called Tethys, who belonged to a species known for their technological expertise. I have verified it 17 times using independent sources, and there is no doubt. But the humans, Vorath protested. They are primitives, barely capable of interstellar travel. So how could they possibly possess weapons of this magnitude? Kethra said nothing, because she was beginning to understand something that the others had not yet grasped. The humans had never been primitive at all. They had been pretending, hiding their true capabilities behind a mask of weakness and incompetence. She thought back to every interaction she had ever had with human diplomats, and she remembered how they had always seemed slightly off, as if they were playing a role rather than being themselves. Now she knew why. Incoming transmission, a technician announced. It is being broadcast on every frequency across the entire galaxy, and it appears to be originating from Earth. The main display flickered, and then a human woman appeared, her face hard and cold and utterly without fear. She wore a military uniform covered in symbols that Kethra did not recognize, and behind her stood rows of human officers who all shared her expression of grim determination. This message is for every civilization watching, the woman said, her voice carrying across light years through the miracle of subspace communication. My name is General Adrienne Cole, and I speak on behalf of the United Earth Defense Council. The chamber fell even more silent, if such a thing was possible, as every ambassador leaned forward to hear what the human would say. 14 minutes ago, the Valkyrie Empire attacked our world without warning or provocation, and they murdered 12 million of our people in a single strike. Cole's eyes seemed to burn with an intensity that made even hardened warriors uncomfortable. They believed we were weak, and they believed we would surrender, but they were wrong. The display shifted to show footage of the Prometheus launch, thousands of missiles rising from hidden silos across Earth and vanishing into hyperspace. What you have witnessed today is humanity's response to unprovoked aggression. I want to make something absolutely clear to every species in this galaxy. Cole paused, letting her words sink in before continuing. We did not seek this war, and we take no joy in the destruction we have caused, but we will never apologize for defending our home. The footage changed again, showing the systematic destruction of Valkyrie military assets across hundreds of light years. Earth is not a world to be taken, and humanity is not a species to be subjugated. Cole's voice rose with power and conviction. What you have witnessed today is not our full capability, and it is merely our restraint, because we targeted only military assets and deliberately spared civilian populations. Kethra felt tears forming in her eyes, though she did not fully understand why. "We are not monsters," Cole continued, "and we do not seek conquest or empire, but understand this with absolute clarity." The general leaned forward, and her eyes seemed to look directly at every being watching the broadcast. "Any nation, any empire, any force that strikes our world will face the same fate that befell the Velkari." She straightened her shoulders, and her voice took on a tone of finality. "This is not a threat, because threats can be ignored, so consider this a promise." The display showed Earth, that small blue world that had just shattered 12,000 years of galactic order. Humanity stands alone, and humanity stands forever. The transmission ended, and the chamber erupted in chaos as dozens of ambassadors tried to speak at once. "They have to be stopped," Ambassador Vora shouted. "If we allow this aggression to go unchallenged, they will conquer us all." "Are you insane?" Another ambassador responded. "Did you not see what they did to the Velkari? Because attacking Earth would be suicide." "We must form a coalition," a third voice called out. "Combine our fleets and overwhelm them before they can strike." "That is exactly what the Velkari tried to do," Tethys pointed out, "and their 340 ships were destroyed in less than 3 minutes. Kethra listened to the arguments raging around her, and she felt something stirring in her chest that she had not felt in 200 years. It was hope. For centuries, she had watched the Velkari crush every species that stood against them, and she had come to believe that resistance was truly futile. But now, a species that everyone had dismissed as primitive and weak had done what no one else had ever accomplished. They had fought back, and they had won. "Ambassadors," Kethra said, her voice cutting through the chaos with the authority of her years. "I believe we are approaching this situation entirely wrong." The chamber quieted as the other representatives turned to look at her. "The humans did not attack the Velkari," Kethra continued. "They responded to an attack, and they explicitly stated that they have no interest in conquest." "How can we trust the word of a species capable of such destruction?" Varth demanded. "Because they proved their word with actions," Kethra replied. "They could have destroyed Velkari Prime completely, and they could have killed billions of civilians, but they chose not to, targeting only military assets and leadership." She stood from her seat and looked around the chamber at her fellow ambassadors. "For 12,000 years, we have lived under the shadow of the Velkari, and we have watched them conquer and enslave and destroy. But today, that shadow has been lifted." Her voice grew stronger with each word. "The humans have given us something that we thought was lost forever, and that something is possibility. The possibility of a galaxy where the weak do not have to kneel before the strong." The chamber fell silent once more, but this time it was a thoughtful silence rather than a fearful one. Kethra sat back down and looked at the image of Earth still displayed on the main screen. Somewhere on that small blue world, a species that had hidden its strength for 60 years was now revealing itself to the universe. And Kethra knew, with a certainty that surprised even herself, that the galaxy would never be the same again. The age of empires was over. The age of something new was about to begin. 5 years had passed since the 14-minute war, and the galaxy had changed in ways that no one could have predicted. General Adrienne Cole, now Secretary General of the United Earth Defense Council, stood on the balcony of the new Snowpala Memorial Complex and looked out at the city that had risen from the ashes of tragedy. 12 million names were carved into the walls of the memorial, each one a reminder of the cost that humanity had paid for its survival, and Cole made sure to visit at least once a month to pay her respects. She had given the order that had destroyed an empire, and she had saved billions of human lives in doing so, but she would never forget the millions who had died before she could act. "Secretary General," her aide called from behind her, "the Marvani delegation has arrived, and Ambassador Kethra is asking to speak with you." Cole nodded and turned away from the memorial, straightening her uniform as she walked toward the reception hall. In the 5 years since the war, Earth had received delegations from dozens of species who had once lived under Velkari rule, and each one had come seeking the same thing. They wanted to understand how humanity had done it. How had a species that everyone believed was primitive and weak managed to build weapons capable of destroying the greatest empire in galactic history? Cole had told them all the same truth, because humanity had nothing left to hide. They had been afraid. When first contact revealed a galaxy ruled by predators, humanity had looked at their options and realized that openly displaying strength would only invite destruction. So they had chosen to appear weak while secretly preparing for the day when they would be forced to fight. For 60 years, every nation on Earth had worked together in complete secrecy, building the weapons and gathering the intelligence that would eventually save them all. It was not a heroic strategy, and it was not something to be proud of, but it had worked. Ambassador Cathra was waiting in the reception hall, her slender form draped in the formal robes of her people, and she smiled warmly as Cole approached. "Secretary General," Cathra said, bowing her head in greeting. "Thank you for seeing me on such short notice." "Ambassador," Cole replied, "you are always welcome on Earth, so please tell me what brings you here today." Cathra's smile widened, and her eyes sparkled with an excitement that Cole had not seen in her before. "I have come to deliver wonderful news," the ambassador said, "because the United Species Council has completed its deliberations, and we have made a decision that I believe will please you greatly." Cole raised an eyebrow because she had not expected the council to reach a conclusion so quickly. In the years since the war, the former subjects of the Velkari Empire had been working to establish a new governing body, one that would be based on cooperation rather than conquest. Earth had been invited to join, but humanity had declined, choosing instead to remain independent while offering assistance to any species that wanted it. The Council has unanimously voted to adopt the Prometheus Doctrine as our founding principle, Cathra announced, her voice filled with pride. "And we want Earth to be our partner in building something new." Cole felt a warmth spreading through her chest, because this was exactly what she had hoped would happen. The Prometheus Doctrine was simple in concept, but revolutionary in practice. Any species that wanted to defend itself, truly defend itself, could come to Earth to learn, not as servants or subordinates, but as equals. Human engineers would teach them how to build weapons that could strike anywhere in the galaxy. Human strategists would show them how to hide their strength until it was needed. Human soldiers would train alongside them, sharing the techniques that had allowed a single world to destroy an empire. The goal was not to create an army that served humanity, but to ensure that no species would ever be helpless prey again. "Ambassador," Cole said, choosing her words carefully, "Earth is honored by this offer, and we will do everything in our power to help the Council succeed. But I must be clear about something." Cathra tilted her head, waiting for the Secretary General to continue. "Humanity will not lead this new alliance," Cole said firmly, "because we have seen what happens when one species places itself above others, and we have no desire to become what we destroyed." The ambassador nodded in understanding, her smile never wavering. "That is exactly why we want you as partners," Cathra replied, "because any species that refuses power when it is offered can be trusted with power when it is needed." Cole allowed herself a small smile, the first genuine smile she had worn in a very long time. 1 week later, the first assembly of the United Species Council was held on Earth, in a grand hall constructed specifically for the occasion. Representatives from 37 species gathered together, former slaves and subjects who had spent millennia under the boot of Velkari oppression. They came from worlds that had been conquered and exploited, from species that had been forced to watch their children sold into slavery, from civilizations that had believed they would never be free. And now they were here, standing as equals in a galaxy that had changed forever. Cole took her seat among the Earth delegation, deliberately choosing a position that was no more prominent than any other. Ambassador Kethra rose to address the assembly, her voice carrying through the hall with a strength that seemed to come from somewhere deep within her soul. "Fellow members of the council," she began, "we have gathered here today to mark the beginning of a new era in galactic history." The chamber fell silent as every being present with rapt attention. For 12,000 years, we lived in fear, and we watched helplessly as the Valkyrie conquered world after world, believing that resistance was impossible. Kethra's gaze swept across the assembly, touching each delegation in turn. But 5 years ago, a species that we had dismissed as primitive showed us the truth that we had forgotten. She turned to look at the human delegation, and her eyes met Cole's across the chamber. Resistance is never impossible, and freedom is never truly lost, as long as there are beings willing to fight for it. The ambassador straightened her shoulders and lifted her chin with pride. "We spent centuries wondering if there was any species in the galaxy capable of standing against tyranny, and we looked to the stars and saw only darkness." Her voice grew stronger with each word. "But the humans were here all along, hiding and waiting and hoping that they would never need to reveal what they truly were." Kethra smiled, and there were tears in her eyes. "And when the moment came, they did not hesitate, and they did not conquer, because they simply refused to die." The chamber erupted in applause, beings of every shape and size rising to their feet to honor the species that had changed everything. Cole stood with her delegation, but she did not join the celebration, because her mind was on the memorial in Snow Paulo and the 12 million names carved into its walls. Humanity had entered the galaxy as prey, hiding their strength and pretending to be weak. They had emerged as something else entirely, not conquerors or rulers, but protectors and teachers. The universe would never forget the 14 minutes that had changed everything, but Cole hoped that they would also remember what came after. She hoped they would remember that humanity had chosen mercy over vengeance and partnership over dominion. And she hoped that the galaxy they were building together would be worthy of the sacrifice that had made it possible. The applause eventually faded, and the work of building a new order began. It would take decades, perhaps centuries, for the wounds of the past to fully heal. But for the first time in 12,000 years, the species of the galaxy were facing the future together, united not by fear of a common enemy, but by hope for a common dream. And somewhere in the void, watching over them all, the spirits of 12 million humans smiled, knowing that their deaths had not been in vain. They had given their lives so that humanity could survive, and humanity had used that survival to change the very nature of the universe. It was, Cole thought as she looked around the chamber at all the beings who had come together in peace, not a bad legacy to leave behind. Not bad at all,